This podcast is brought to you in part by a generous supporter of the Monarch School. The mission of the Monarch School is to educate students impacted by homelessness and to help them develop hope for a future with the necessary skills and experience for personal success. Monarch has served San Diego County for 30 years, beginning as a one-room drop-in center and growing into a comprehensive K-12 school. Nearly 300 students attend school each day at their Barrio Logan campus, where they learn academic, social, emotional, and life skills. To learn more, visit monarchschools.org.
Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keatts.
What's up, my man?
And amiga Sara Libby.
What's up?
How are you guys?
Here we are.
Yeah.
Another week has transpired.
That's correct. We, my son, he stands. He's okay with me watching baseball. He's not really into it. My daughter's really into it. But one of the things that he really does like about baseball is those commercials for the Honda dealership that come up during the Padres games. And it's like they're trying to get people to come buy cars, and so they change their uniforms, and they also bring the San Diego chicken around.
Yeah.
And there's one part where the chicken lays an egg, and I don't know what it is, but it just busts my son up each time.
Every time?
Just each time. I mean, he's just like, blah. I mean, it just touches something in his soul that he finds glorious. Then,
that's good.
Yeah.
This is an expansive view about liking something about baseball.
Yeah. I'm trying, man. I'm trying. My daughter's into it. She's all aboard. My son's just not caught the bug yet. But San Diego Chicken's been entertaining people for a long time.
Yeah, it's true.
And it was kind of strange this week to be listening to Embedded. So Embedded is the NPR podcast where Kelly McEvers goes deep into some topic. It's like opioids or something. And she tells stories very well. And she did a 3-part thing about Trump, which I found very illuminating. The Apprentice episode, for example, was fascinating on his background with that show, what that show did for him. And I never watched it. You were an Apprentice watcher.
Of course. I'm a reality TV connoisseur.
Yeah. So it like highlighted the best side of him. It made him this player that I wasn't on that train, so I didn't even realize it. But it was a big deal, huh?
The Clinton folks always said that like people have second guessed our strategy, but we had clear polling that suggested like the power of The Apprentice was insurmountable. That it had embedded in the public's imagination this view of him as an unparalleled success in the world of business.
Yeah.
And we there was nothing we could ever say that would undo that.
Yeah. And was it good?
It's like any reality season or reality show where the first few seasons are amazing and it produces its own like cast of stars and personalities, like Omarosa's in the administration now.
Yeah.
And she was once a ridiculous reality TV figure.
Yeah. So, the third part of this show, so the second part was interesting, and the third part was about Steve Bannon and his early career as a filmmaker and what his life was like in Hollywood, how it took off in this sort of conservative media world. And it turns out that Steve Bannon's first movie was about the San Diego Chicken.
Mm-hmm.
Who knew?
Yeah.
And apparently he had this grand vision of the San Diego Chicken in the movie about it being like a whole new like children's
like the
entertainment.
Next Barney.
Yeah, new children's entertainment phenomenon. People would buy like the chicken merch. It'd be all chicken all the time. And again,
that was the name of the movie.
All
actually.
this-
all chicken all the time.
guy has to do is lay an egg and bless my son up. So there's something there.
Yeah, there was something there.
But the film didn't do well.
Yeah.
And it went on. He ended up doing a movie about Ronald Reagan that got the attention of this conservative media world, and that's how his whole thing takes off. But the story of San Diego mascots came up again this week. We were having a conversation about that, but there was also this announcement from the Major League Lacrosse.
National Lacrosse League.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay.
It touches something there, doesn't it?
Well, there's a completely different league.
Oh, okay. Which
That-
is better?
the Major League Lacrosse is the outdoor league. It's probably higher profile.
Oh, okay. The National Lacrosse League is indoor.
Higher profile being a relative term.
It's on ESPN.
Oh, okay. 2.
The Ocho.
The Ocho.
So the National League Lacrosse team.
National Lacrosse League, yeah.
Sorry.
Really gonna go down this road, huh?
Just trying to be accurate.
They
Just trying to be accurate.
they have a new mascot for this team and a name,
Yeah.
and it's the Seals.
Yeah.
But see, I've surfed and ran into seals a lot. They are not the fearsome seal that's in this logo. This is a logo of a seal that's about to bomb you.
I think, is it meant to be a play on Navy SEALs?
Well, that's what they said, but that seems like it's coming a little close to the line of, I don't know what you call copyright of, like, you couldn't do like F-13s.
Can you not?
I don't know.
I don't know.
It seems weird. Well, people don't like the whole stolen valor thing. Like,
Yeah, that's true.
you probably shouldn't imitate.
I mean, the mascot is a seal.
It's an actual seal
Yeah.
that looks vicious.
Yeah.
So the San Diego Seals. So,
But we learned something about San Diego and our marine life
Mascots.
featured mascots. Which
Yeah.
is,
So in the discussion of the seal, we learned that Point Loma Nazarene's mascot is a sea lion, right?
it's a sea lion,
A sea lion.
which is perfectly fine.
Yeah,
Sea
no,
lions
that
live
makes sense.
well, they had to change it because it was the Crusaders,
Oh, okay.
and that was a little
Sure.
rough.
Yeah.
Had some
here. Probably a good decision.
So we got to look at the actual sea lion, and it's not a marine animal. It's an actual lion.
It's a lion.
Whose hair is made of seaweed.
By seaweed,
It's like
we
a
mean,
Rasta lion.
Yeah, the mascot costume makes very
Rory,
clear.
his name.
Yeah, that's a great name.
Makes
Rory.
very clear that there was no one selling a sea lion mascot costume,
Right.
but they were selling a lion costume. So the resilient people over at Point Loma Nazarene
Resourceful.
bought
yes.
the lion and then put green fabric on its head and said that was seaweed and therefore it's a sea lion.
It's a
Yeah.
sea lion.
Well,
Done deal.
genius. Well,
It is
first of all,
genius.
I there's another level of genius to it, which is that if you put seaweed on your head, you are terrifying.
Yeah, that's also
there is no
true.
situation where anybody puts seaweed on their head and is not terrifying.
Yeah.
that's true.
So
Sea
good on
lion.
for resourcefulness.
Yeah.
I'm on a resourcefulness kick this
Yeah.
week.
Yeah.
Something I've been talking about a lot. So there you go.
It's not new. You've been on resourcefulness as long as I've known you.
No, it's just something I came up with.
Okay.
Speaking of resourcefulness, these school districts. So let's first of all, we got a good show today, but we are not having a guest. But there's another podcast being produced about homelessness and the Hep A crisis. So check that out. That'll be in your feed. Lisa Halverstadt and Kinsey Moreland are working on that, along with a preview of the movie Tony about a homeless man in San Diego, and the filmmakers are going to be in to talk about that. So. But that'll be a separate installment in the feed. So we wanted to talk about some discussion going forward about resources, about money that local governments want, that they are excited might be easier to get now. So you might remember a few months ago, there was this Supreme Court ruling we talked a lot about, which seemed to say that this rule to raise taxes, that it requires 2/3 vote for a special tax, there might be a new get around of that, which is that the Supreme Court ruled that citizens' initiatives do not fall within that same constitutional rule, and therefore do not need to conform to that 2/3 requirement.
Right.
So if you have a citizens initiative that is to raise taxes, you may only need 50% of the vote to impose those taxes. And so everybody's coming up with ideas. There has been this long-running discussion in San Diego politics behind the scenes about some sort of grand bargain. And give us the update on what you know about that. So this was downtown hoteliers and mayor's office types, and then left-leaning progressives and labor union leaders trying to come up with some kind of grand deal, right?
Yeah, that's right. So this was a couple weeks ago. There were these relatively formalized negotiations between a lot of the major players on the left, including labor, but also neighborhood groups and immigrant groups like PANA and Michael McConnell, who's a local homelessness advocate. We're all at the table, along with basically a who's who of downtown establishment insider types.
Like Chris Michelle,
Chris
for
Michelle,
example, Mike McDowell, the leader of the lobbyists for the hotel associations. Chris Michelle is the departing downtown partnership leader who's now going to be working for the mayor's office on the downtown projects like the convention center.
Right, and there was also a member of the mayor's staff at that time who was there, but in her private capacity, she took leave to be there. So they were discussing a number of things. Their formal statement to me was that there were no details available, and this was just preliminary discussions and their work on things. I was able to pull out from other folks a broad construct of what may have been discussed. Of course, that could change, but what was being discussed at that time, based on my reporting, was 2 measures. One would be a hotel tax increase that would pay for a convention center expansion, as well as homelessness services, potentially streets, but it seemed to be mostly homelessness services. And then a second measure that would be that the money would come from something like a real estate transfer fee or something along those lines, and would go towards affordable housing specifically, and that those 2 measures would kind of run in tandem as a vote yes on A and B type thing.
And that both sides would work to pass both of them.
Yeah, that would be the grand bargain.
Now
we've now agreed to these 2 things. We're each doing something we don't like, and now we're all pushing in the same direction.
Now it sounds like the push is still on to do the convention center, but this sort of grand bargain may be not coming together.
It seems not to. A couple groups have announced that they've pulled out of those discussions, and we'll see if they can still come to an agreement, if there's enough people remaining at the table to still form a winning coalition, and maybe there is. But
so bottom line is there is some definite action in city politics groups about potentially putting revenue measures on the ballot that may only need 50% of the vote or slightly more than 50%.
That's right.
And that would raise taxes, and that's according to the Supreme Court ruling. There was another bit of news. This is from Megan Burks at KPBS, who said that the board president of San Diego Unified School District, Richard Barrera, told the station that the school district is actively exploring whether to put a school funding measure on the 2018 ballot. He said it would not be a bond nor a parcel tax or anything that requires a majority vote, which means that the school district can't put it on there. If it is trying to go around this, some citizens group, maybe the teachers union, maybe some grand bargain of reformers and teachers
Friends
union
of
or
San
something.
Diego Unified, a newly created group of whatever.
Yeah, would come up with a citizens initiative, get the measure on the ballot, and then they tried a parcel tax in 2010. They tried to increase the parcel tax, and that would fund anything they want. Unlike a construction bond, they could use it for teacher salaries and whatever. That got a majority vote, barely, but it didn't get 2/3. And so that's probably what he's thinking. He led that charge back then. They had gotten polling. This was a funny little history. They had gotten polling that said it would easily get 2/3. And that's part of what encouraged them to go for it. And then without a campaign to really squelch it, it didn't even come close. 2010 was not a good
I was going to say, keep in
year.
mind
Yeah,
what happened. 2010 was
absolutely.
the Tea Party wave.
Yeah. So the point is like there's a lot of people thinking about this opportunity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, and so one of those, we got some official news in San Francisco.
Yeah.
The city attorney in San Francisco issued a memo that said, yes, this Supreme Court ruling, in my legal opinion, does the thing that some people have interpreted it as. There were other people who suggested maybe it hadn't. They wrote, the city attorney there wrote, the Supreme Court decision did not reach the issue of whether a special tax submitted by voter initiative needs only a simple majority vote and not the 2/3 vote required of special taxes. But because the court's analysis and reasoning also appear to apply to the 2/3 voting requirement for special taxes, both special and general taxes proposed by voter initiative now likely require only a majority vote of the electorate to pass. This has been interpreted to mean there in San Francisco that folks will put up a hotel tax increase. It's also likely to be sued by a group like the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Initiative, which would test this legal interpretation. And maybe that'll happen before we go to the ballot. I don't know if they did a special election. But otherwise, we'll get clarity on this soon, and we're not the only people thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, if you remember when the ruling initially came out, there was this big knee-jerk, everyone can pass with 50% now. And then there was kind of like a second wave of actually, maybe not, maybe it doesn't really say that, maybe that doesn't do that at all. And so this, up in San Francisco is significant because it's sort of the first official body that we're seeing say, we interpret it as 50% and we're moving forward with official
and I had heard
because of it.
I had heard the San Diego City Attorney Mara Elliott was going through a similar process to analyze this, and that hasn't yet come out. Now, just to translate a little bit of what you were talking about, so right now, if you want to raise taxes just for whatever the government needs, just money for the government, like the school district, you only need 50% or more. It's when you actually say, I'm going to use it for a specific purpose that you need 2/3. So that's the general tax increase is what's called I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to use the money for. And a special tax is the one where you say, like, I'm going to use it for a convention center or a stadium or whatever. And so what they basically, what he's reading it as, and the way I read it too, is that they're saying that citizens' initiatives are a completely separate discussion that don't fall into that rule. And so even though it doesn't specifically say you only need 50%, it's saying that all those rules in that package just don't apply to citizens' initiatives. They can tax themselves, basically.
Right.
So fascinating, but what you're laying out is a potential that this stuff in San Francisco could pass, some of these things in San Diego could pass, and it might all be lined up and waiting for the Supreme Court to let loose or to throw back.
Yes. And the other avenue is that there are talks at the state level of carving out this exemption in state law and kind of fortifying it in the Constitution of what the rules are. But I would guess that it's going to go to the courts.
Well, and one of the things that had been, my understanding, discussed at, for instance, this grand bargain negotiations in San Diego was that this might be a fleeting opportunity. That this might be a loophole that exists only for a short period before a constitutional amendment could be passed, right, or something else that closes it. And so we must act now, which, if other folks have that same interpretation, would create a race to the 2018 ballot, yeah, and could, to borrow a term from my friend Scott Lewis, create a real bananas ballot situation.
Mm-hmm. Hashtag bananas ballot.
Yeah, it will be a bananas ballot. I mean, think about it. Not only we have all these, maybe school tax, maybe 2 or 3 taxes for the city, but then there's also these 2 competing measures, right? We had Kim Kilkenny in here to talk about the San Diego State, the Friends of San Diego State.
San Diego State.
Yeah, they want to basically have this state be able to buy that property underneath Qualcomm Stadium. And then there's, of course, the Soccer City ballot measure, which they're going to go head to head. They already want us to, both sides want us to dig into this thing, but it's not. It's a year away. Give us some time, right?
Yeah, they're not even on the ballot yet. Although they did hit me up at Trader Joe's.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that San Diego State thing. So it's out there in the field. We should
It's
call
there in the wild.
We should call our victory, our hotline on
right.
signature gathering, see how much they're doing for it.
Should, yeah. But it's 13 months away, that
Yeah.
election. Well, presumably.
So, but all of this, it's going to be interesting. We're going to have some effort in helping people understand. They might have to put on a podcast just about explaining the ballot.
There is a group that has discussed putting up a ballot measure in 2018 for funding for Balboa Park as well. There's a GoFundMe page floating out there for that nascent effort as well. So it could be a bunch of things on the ballot.
All right, our hero of the week.
So this one goes to the Poway Unified School District. So they were responding to some records requests from our colleague Ashley McGlone, and they gave her a batch of records, and then they came back later and said, actually, we found something else that might fulfill this request hidden in a drawer somewhere. And it turned out they had found documents indicating that several managers at the district had been getting this special retirement pay, and they couldn't find board approval for it.
Yeah.
So
$150,000 worth of payments made to 15 employees over a number of years, and they can't find where that was ever approved.
Right. So basically,
Is that bad?
it's bad.
Okay.
It's bad that happened.
Yeah.
But we're saying they're a hero because they immediately turned it over to their lawyers and to the DA's office and made it public to a reporter as part of a records request. Imagine a school district fulfilling one of those willingly.
Yeah. So kudos. Thank you there's obviously new blood up in leadership who are helping us understand what's going on there. Okay, we're going to save the GOAT of the week for the second part of the show. First of all, again, I want to remind you we have a special homelessness podcast coming out in this same feed. So if you're on the podcast, please check it out there. Kinsey Moreland and Lisa Halverstadt will be talking to filmmakers with the new film Tony, which has been screening around town. And it's about a local homeless man. And also, please remember you can go and check out our schools guide. The November 13th deadline for choosing schools is coming up, and that's at voiceofsandiego.org/schools-guide. And for those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo, thank you for joining us.
Support for Voice of San Diego podcast is made possible in part by a generous supporter of Make-A-Wish San Diego, a nonprofit that grants wishes to children with critical medical conditions. One of Make-A-Wish's clients is 17-year-old Gabriel, who was born with a rare genetic muscle disease. When Gabriel was told by Make-A-Wish San Diego that he could wish for anything in the world and they'd try to make it happen, he first thought about wanting to meet Britney Spears. But he soon realized that the thing he wanted most of all was to publish a book. He teamed up with his best friend Danielle, and the two wrote Genesis, a young adult fantasy thriller. With the help of Make-A-Wish San Diego, they found a publisher, and the book will be released at a book signing event at Barnes & Noble at Escondido on October 29th. I called Gabriel and Danielle to talk about the experience.
Okay, so for a long time, I had no idea the doctors had no idea what my official disability was because it's very rare, and it wasn't, of course, it was like around 1999 when they first gave me like a study of what it was, so they had no idea what it was, and not until like I was about like 14 or 15, they found out exactly what my disability was with the genetic thing, you know what I mean? And after that, I became eligible for Make-A-Wish. And at the time, I was like around 15 and starting high school. And the book was just, a little side project. It was probably going to end up like forgotten had this not happened. And when they came by, I had no idea what to pick. I was almost going to pick, meeting a celebrity like Britney Spears or something. But instead, I thought, what if I could publish a book? And I thought it was probably an outlandish idea, but I asked, and here we are now.
Right, so this is a full novel. How many pages did it turn out to be?
394.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. A serious book. Congratulations. You can hear the rest of my interview with Gabrielle and Danielle and learn more about the book they wrote at the end of the show.
Okay, our goat of the week.
You lose! Good day, sir!
All right, this goes to the mayor's office for throwing quite a celebratory press conference announcing the status of the city's climate action plan, which they boasted was well ahead of schedule in reducing greenhouse gases in the city and had, at this point, cut greenhouse gases by 19.3% from where they were in 2010, and that was ahead of where they need to be to meet their goals for 2020 and 2035. So this climate action plan is a broad policy. It includes a lot of different things to cut our greenhouse gas emissions levels in half by 2035. And what we're specifically talking about today is that they're taking credit primarily for the actions that they had nothing to do with.
Yeah, so let's remember. So this is a broad policy outline, like you said. There's enforceable goals, and this is an annual report that comes out that's required under that policy to say how you're doing, right?
And it's a perfectly fine thing to track progress and see where you need help. That releasing this report is a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Yes, it's just that all of the progress comes from where?
Yeah, so all of the progress, what they say the 19.3% reduction in greenhouse gases, according to the report, are largely due to higher vehicle efficiency standards. That's a federal law. Increases in renewable energy generation, which is a state law, and a higher solid waste diversion rate. Only that piece right there is something that the city of San Diego has any role in.
What's the solid waste diversion rate?
Garbage.
There's less garbage?
Yeah, they're putting zero waste policies, producing less waste and diverting it to different, compost and that sort of thing.
So I don't understand how that affects climate or carbon emissions. It's just that it doesn't sit and like decompose or something?
It does. I don't know, because of reasons.
Okay.
So the
Thanks.
So in the climate action plan, I went back and pulled it up. Again, the climate action plan doesn't mislead anybody in any way. It's very clear about the fact that it's it's including what state and federal requirements are going to do for the carbon footprint of the city in the first place, which of course it should. So it breaks it down in multiple different years. In 2020, it says that state and federal actions will be responsible for 81% of all the cuts. And then on the local level, it says that 13% of the cuts will come from local transportation, getting people to drive less, basically. Less than 1% will have to do with water. 4% will have to do with solid waste and wastewater. So that's the one area. 4% is the one area that they're willing to say has had some role in the city's level so far. And by 2035, when that the big end result is state and federal actions will account for 68% of all of the reductions, local transport 12%, and local electricity and natural gas 15%. So there really is the rub, is that if the city is going to meet this big goal, it will rely on state and federal actions, and then locally it will come down to two things substantially: local transportation and local electricity and natural gas. And by the city's own report, those things haven't started to happen yet.
Yeah, so one of the best pieces of advice I've heard, and I don't remember where I heard it, as a podcast or something, was like, look, don't tell people what you're going to do. At least try not to tell people what you're going to do, because if let's say you're going to go on a diet or you're going to like learn Spanish or something, the act of telling people that you're going to do that gets you the gratification of doing that and makes it less likely you'll actually do that. Now, obviously, you have to tell people you're going to do this climate action plan, but I feel like this press conference and stuff is that same sort of concept, right? Like they're getting the gratification of this plan without doing those two giant things that are going to be very difficult and controversial. One being people are going to have to live closer together and take more transit or alternative to cars, biking or whatever.
Right.
And then the second being they're going to have to get 100% of their electricity from natural or clean sources.
Right.
And those are going to be very difficult things to pull off, and we should maybe hold off on the back padding until we've wrestled with those difficult things.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that a press conference in which you talk about how great you are is not difficult to pull off.
Yes.
It's really fun.
And
it
there's
seems like for the mayor's office, so they do it a lot.
Well, there's going to be some really gigantic problems about, like, we can't even get a large, smart growth plan in effect for like the main areas of the central area of the city. Well, and so the idea that like those kinds of things across the city are going to be easy to pull off is a little bit in danger, right?
Well, so I think this might be revealing about a certain way that the city leadership thinks about this plan, which is a year ago when it was passing new community plan updates in North Park, Uptown, and Golden Hill. It hadn't even, at the time it was ready to approve those plans, it had not even considered whether those plans did enough to change the living arrangements and where the population density and mobility options to help meet these goals. They hadn't even done that analysis. They were dragged into doing that by advocates, and when they did, the conclusion was no, these things won't meet the standards outlined in this climate action plan. And the city's reaction to that was to say, well, we might be able to in later community plans, or we'll just, if we don't make up for these GHG reductions in this specific sector, we'll do more in another one.
Exactly.
Which is to say, yes, that's the hard part, and we might be able to make up for it elsewhere. And so when you still have yet to tackle the two fundamental difficult parts that you actually have a role in, and you're touting the benefits of the actions that you have nothing to do with, it seems to suggest that maybe they don't actually think that these two difficult decisions apply as much pressure on their decision making as people might have initially perceived when they passed this plan, that they might not feel like the requirement to make these reductions happen by 2035 binds them in which decisions they can make to the extent that we thought they might be.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just like going to, and this was my worry about this from the beginning, is like it's easy to go to a place like Ocean Beach, right? And say like, we're going to reduce greenhouse gases by 50% and 100% clean energy. And everybody be like, yeah, sure. But then go to them and say, but that means major development on Sports Arena Boulevard and maybe more mass transit there, also more density on some of these other areas. And that's going to be like a really tough discussion.
Yeah, Ocean Beach is probably the most interesting place. Like Ocean Beach, I bet the climate action plan polls at, like 80%
right
in Ocean Beach. But when they passed a new community plan a few years ago, it didn't increase density at all.
Yeah, it's a non-starter.
Right.
And so that's the small version of the whole city right now.
Yeah.
And it probably universally loved climate action plan as long as it doesn't change people's neighborhoods, but it must change people's neighborhoods in order to be successful.
Yeah. So again, I want to say, not accusing the city of a bait and switch here. The climate plan outlined very clearly, repeatedly, multiple times, that achieving these goals would rely heavily on state and federal actions. And so the fact that that's happened so far is perfectly fine. It just is a little bit misleading to hold a press conference about how far ahead of schedule you are when the things that you're responsible for have yet to really start.
Yeah. All right, another issue that we've been following, and this is about vacation rentals. So just quickly, last week we talked about how the city attorney, Mara Elliott, had kind of thrown a wrench in this whole discussion. There was supposed to be this giant hearing on Monday that would maybe set this issue to rest, at least for a long time, or at least put in motion a framework that would set it to rest. She put out a memo right before the deadline to discuss this stuff and these memos about what city council members wanted to do to either allow vacation rentals or somehow restrict them or make permitting required. And it blew the whole thing up. They canceled the meeting and basically blamed her, or were worried that she had screwed everything up by saying that their ideas were illegal.
At the 11th hour, especially.
Exactly. Now she's pushing.
But quite literally, memo came out at the very last minute it could have to be included in the city council docket.
Yeah, no, so she's pushing back on that idea and doing a round of interviews, and we've been our Lisa Halverstad has a piece about this as well. She says she didn't do that. She was just trying to help. Here she was on Kogo Radio the other day, our partners explaining her thinking.
So we wanted to lay down groundwork for Monday's meeting so that everybody knew what can you do that day and what needs to be continued for another day. So it's a very complex explanation for what happened. It was an unusual road to get to where we are, but we were trying to equip them with the information that they would need so that they could actually get done on Monday.
So she's adamant that they could have maybe worked it out on Monday. She says it's okay that they put it off. Maybe that'll give us some more time. And her bottom perspective as well was like, look, these should have gone as proposals to committees and been vetted there, and then got pushed up. At that point, the city attorney would have had a lot more time to weigh in, and the public could have weighed in better. But she's pushing back on the idea that she was the boogeyman that ruined this discussion. But when you read her memo, you can see why it might have been intimidating to the city council members, right?
So when I read the memo, it did seem like a closed door. It did seem to say these things are irreconcilable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that said, of course, a city council person could pick up the phone or send an email. So I don't understand how this could be such a miscommunication if you didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, it's surprising that she's surprised. Particularly when, as we pointed out, she doesn't take any steps to lay out what is possible. And, maybe that's not her job. She's not a policymaker, but she didn't open any doors as she seemed to have closed one.
Right. And now, but I don't want to put it all at her feet. Like, the memo came out, and within a few hours, Councilman Alvarez had given quotes to the UT saying, like, well, I guess we can't have this meeting on
this
Monday.
Is over.
This is over. And maybe a phone call to the city attorney's office to see if that was in fact necessary could have cleared up any ambiguity about whether it was a problem that could be fixed.
Well,
or a in-person meeting, or an email, or a text message, or a voicemail.
Other ways of communication.
Tweet.
So
DM.
Apparently the train is maybe getting back on track to get some of these things done. They're going to push through, and the discussion, they're talking better, apparently. So at the heart, though, is still the question of, there's basically this idea of, do you let people who own a whole home rent out that whole home to people who stay for short trips? And the memo says it has to be a certain minimum stay, like 2 or 3 days, right? Or the idea from these 4 city council members says that. So that's a little interesting, I guess, for some people who just want to rent it out maybe nightly or something. On the other spectrum, end of the spectrum, is Barbara Bree, who says, yeah, you can rent out your whole home as long as you live there, and as long as you're only renting it out in this way for up to 90 days.
A year.
So that's the only case in which you can rent out a whole home.
Which, to make things, that means you couldn't buy a second home for the purpose of treating it like a Airbnb as an income-generating property. But you, Scott Lewis, who lives in a home with your family, if you were going to go on a 2-week vacation and you wanted to supplement the pay for part of your trip by renting out your home while you're gone, because people would like to stay in beautiful Ocean Beach, you could do that.
Yes. And
you'd even have, at the end of that, you'd have like 80 more days that you could still rent it out over the course of the year. So it would be pretty disruptive, but it does allow an avenue for some of the things that people talk about Airbnb allowing them to do to keep happening.
Right.
But it would still be quite disruptive for a lot of the other things that are frankly kind of old hat in San Diego. The idea of people buying properties for the express purpose of using them as short-term rentals.
Well, and there's also like some really interesting discussions too about, so one of the measures in the sort of compromise bill that the 4 city council members put out is that you can do this whole home rental and get a permit for it that's not too hard to get unless your house is like over 4 bedrooms, in which case there's worry that would be like a hotel party house thing, and so you would need a conditional use permit, which basically means you wouldn't get a permit. It would be very difficult to.
Yeah.
So lots of interesting things need to get hashed out, but it seems like the train to hash them out is maybe wobbling back onto the track.
Sounds like it might be. Her point that these types of things should go through the committee is not a bad one. We do have a committee process, and other policies have successfully gone through the committee process while getting improved along the way.
It's just that some of the committee members maybe don't want them to go. And that's when 4 city council members get together to try to go in a different way.
Right.
It's also just the timing issue of this has been dragged out for so long already. And here we were thinking, oh, there's 4 city council members on board. All they need is one more. This is really happening. And it didn't happen.
Well, that's the story of San Diego. This just impressive dysfunction sometimes. So that's a story we'll continue to tell. And thank you so much for supporting us. If you care about this and this service and all the things that we do here, please support us at voiceofsandiego.org/donate. And thank you for joining us today.
Now back to our sponsored interview with Make-A-Wish recipient Gabriel and his co-author Danielle. Tell me about how you two met. You kind of have always, what brought you together was your love of reading, is that right?
Kind of. We both went to the same middle school and we go to the same high school.
We met through a mutual friend.
Yeah.
She just told me about him and then I acquainted myself with him.
Yeah, I was basically walking after class, minding my own business, and she says hi to me, and I was kind of like defensive at the time, so I thought it was like, a ploy to like mess with me or whatever, but I eventually started saying hi back, and we just said hi to each other every day, and now we're friends.
Best friends?
Yeah.
Aw. So when you are doing the book signing, are you is this a kickoff to a tour, or what's sort of the plan to get this book out there?
What we're going to do is we're kind of responsible for our own advertising. The book signing at Barnes & Noble is just a day event. What we're going to do is have the rest of our books be available online, and we'll advertise through our school and just get the word out that way.
Right. Is the plan to have this be the first in a series?
Yes, it's going to be a trilogy.
Yeah.
Wow. Have you already started working on the second one?
No.
You're probably still recovering from the first.
Yeah, we're probably going to wait until we graduate to start the second one.
So tell us the title of the book and give us your 5-minute elevator pitch for it. What's it about?
Okay, the title of the book is Genesis, and it's basically about this 19-year-old girl named Helen Chappelle who lives in Camden, Maine, and where nothing really happens. And she has this memory with her sister of her parents disappearing 10 years ago. And her world is suddenly turned upside down by a violent break-in that separates her and her older sister. She then discovers a world where things aren't what they seem when the Einhedjar, a race of half-human, half-fae warriors charged with protecting mankind, claim her as one of their own. Against all odds, she makes new friends and begins to adjust to the unpredictable lifestyle of the Einhedjar. Her newfound way of life is compromised when she finds herself caught in the middle of a power struggle. She will quickly learn the consequences of trusting the wrong person.
Ooh, so it sounds like a young adult thriller fantasy. Is that right?
Yes, basically.
Nice. And you two co-wrote it together?
Yes.
Okay. And what did that process look like? Would one of you write a page and then send it to the other person, or
Well, we both used Google Docs to write it, and on Google Docs you can both write at the same time and see edits like live time. So what we would do is it took us a long time to actually write an outline, because for a while we were both just like going all over the place with the book. But once we finally got it, once we finally got an outline down, we both kind of alternated with the work, and then we would both edit each other's and like make comments and stuff to improve it.
Yeah.
Wow, that can be difficult collaborating like that. Did you have any challenges, or was it a fairly easy process? You two can take edits well.
Both of us are very stubborn, and it was kind of difficult at first to like cut things out or like just agree on certain things. So it was very difficult for a while, but we both managed to compromise and get along in the end.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what has your experience with Make-A-Wish been like? How important of a role have they played in this process?
I'm very happy that they waited this long. We started this back in like 2015, and now it's almost 2018. I'm glad they worked with me through this, through the time it took and everything, and they've been really helpful and glad to help, and they've been really excited to do this, and now we're glad it's finally coming to be.
You can find Gabrielle and Danielle's book Genesis on Amazon and at the Barnes & Noble in Escondido. To find out more about Make-A-Wish San Diego and the kids they work with, visit sandiego.wish.org. The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button, or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.